President Trump has been uncharacteristically quiet this weekend on much of the unrest around the nation. But today that changed when he unloaded on the nation's governors, calling them weak for failing to aggressively enforce law and order during police brutality protests.
You have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. They're going to run over you. You're going to look like a puncher jerk. You have to dominate. And you have to arrest people, and you have to try people. And they have to go to jail for long periods of time. It's happened before. It's happened numerous times. And the only time it's successful is when you're weak. And most of you are weak.
His comments came as Washington, D.C.'s mayor announced a 7 p.m. curfew in the nation's capital for the next 2 nights. As Natalie Brand reports, last night's protests took place just a few yards away from the doors of the White House.
Graffiti on the Lincoln Memorial and glass on the sidewalk show just some of the damage from violent protests overnight. Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser toured the city this morning.
I'm very angry that people would destroy their own city, or people who are come here and destroy our city.
The demonstrations in the nation's capital were peaceful throughout the day as thousands marched against racial injustice in America. But some began looting and damaging buildings after the sun went down.
All of us need to work to make sure that we stop destruction, but we are focused on what we need to do to change our country.
Some of the damage includes a fire in the basement of the historic St. John's Church near Lafayette Square, just across from the White House. Every president since James Madison has attended a service here. CBS News has confirmed the Secret Service briefly moved President Trump to the White House bunker during the protests Friday night. White House advisors are weighing the idea of the president addressing the nation. On Twitter, he blamed far-left Antifa radicals for the violence.
A national Oval Office address is not going to stop Antifa. What's going to stop Antifa is action, and this president is committed to acting on this.
Attorney General William Barr ordered the Bureau of Prisons to send riot teams to Miami and Washington, D.C.
And when you have somebody in power who breathes oxygen to hate under the rocks, it comes out through the rocks.
Former Vice President and presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden met with African-American leaders this morning to talk about how to diffuse tensions. Natalie Brand, CBS News, Washington.
And CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins me now from Washington. Hi, Ed. So you broke the story of the president's call for CBS News. What more can you tell us about this call?
Oh, gosh, Tanya, where to begin? Look, he had this call this morning with governors from across the country and essentially proceeded to berate them for the response in many of the nation's largest cities, calling out specifically the chaos in Philadelphia, New York, Washington, Los Angeles, and the way that things improved in Minneapolis over the weekend as that city began to use more law enforcement personnel and National Guard to quell the violence. He accused many of the agitators of being far-left radicals or Antifa, fascist protesters, and said that the governor should be making greater use of what he called the greatest resource, the National Guard, urging them to call out more military troops if needed to help stop this. He repeatedly called them weak and said that if they weren't able to stop these aggressors, in his words, then they're going to continue to strike out. It's happened numerous times, he said, and the only time it's successful is when you're weak. And most of you are weak, the president said. I will say this, what's going on in Los Angeles, he said, for example, the looting there, quote, they're all broken and gone, the windows at some of the stores. The merchandise is gone. It's a shame. It didn't look as bad to me. Maybe it was the sunshine. I don't know. But in Los Angeles, the storefronts are gone. Philadelphia is a mess. What happened there is horrible. Calling on these governors to do more. Now, notably, some governors got on the call and agreed with the president. Georgia's Brian Kemp said that his state had better coordinated with Atlanta to quell violence that had started up on Friday night. West Virginia Republican Governor Jim Justice said that if other states don't want the president, he's welcome to come to the Mountaineer state, where this kind of violence, Justice said, is unacceptable. But J.B. Pritzker, the Democratic governor of Illinois, called on the president to tone down his own rhetoric, saying that it is contributing to the ongoing violence and the reaction to all of this, and that he should be saying more, in a sort of diplomatic way, as opposed to the way he's talking now. In response, the president said, quote, well, I don't like your rhetoric much either, but that's okay. We don't have to agree with each other. One person on this call, and I listened to it myself, Tanya, all 55 or so minutes of it, one person on this call described the president as unhinged, said he sounded angry, really seemed to be unloading on the nation's state chief executives. And if you think about it, this really is a president now engaging with essentially his peers, other leaders, other senior government leaders in this country, and he was essentially urging them to use more aggressive police enforcement tactics to take out these protesters as quickly as possible, suggesting at one point that if police officers have bricks or rocks thrown at them, they should pick up those bricks and rocks and throw them back, have their biggest guys go after those that threw the rocks. Certainly there are people in this country who feel that way, but it's one thing when it comes from the top person in government leadership, when it comes from the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States.
And so, Ed, what exactly does the president want the states to do? Did he lay that out for them?
He did. He said, call up more National Guard. They're there and they're ready for you at your disposal. Arrest those that are looting, breaking into stores, causing the damage that was seen especially in Washington, Los Angeles, and other cities last night. He also even urged some states to consider passing new flag-burning bans. That is a constitutionally protected form of expression. But the president said, given the new conservative makeup of the Supreme Court, perhaps some of these states could actually enact a flag-burning ban. He said his Justice Department would support them, and he believes the Supreme Court would ultimately back those laws. A pretty interesting and specific call to take on some of the specific violence and outrage that we've seen over the last few days in the streets.
Ed, you mentioned that the president is blaming a lot of this violence on Antifa, the anti-fascist activists. Did he offer any evidence of this? And also, did he address the fact that there are other reports that some of this violence is also being spurred on by white supremacist groups?
He did not mention white supremacist groups. He did mention Antifa. And he said if you look at some of the ways that these people are protesting and causing damage, it bears hallmarks of the Occupy Wall Street movement that went on earlier this century, mostly in New York. He called them out specifically a few times. And it did sound like Attorney General William Barr, who was on the call, and at least one other governor who was on the call, seemed to agree with the president that it could be those groups. But Minnesota Democratic Governor Tim Walz, of course, has been under a bit of a microscope the last few days, given the way his state has comported itself in all of this, including the needless arrest of one of our colleagues, or a few of our colleagues in journalism. He said, look, some of this is legitimate anger, and a lot of it has been peaceful, and we have to respect that and allow that to go on. But he said that the coordination with the military has made things smoother and far less violent over the last few days. And I think, Tanya, one other thing we should keep in mind. He was speaking with these governors in this way at 11 a.m. Eastern this morning, and at the exact same time, his presumed Democratic opponent, Joe Biden, was sitting in a church in Wilmington, Delaware, his hometown, meeting with pastors, with other civil rights activists from Delaware, with a Jewish rabbi, listening to them, mostly listening to them, talk about their concerns about what's happened and how he or the federal government moving forward could respond to the anger, the agitation, the reason why many people are nonviolently protesting what went on last week in Minneapolis. Biden said that he would be establishing some kind of police review board at the federal level to take a look at these things, and suggested that in some ways police officers should consider using less lethal tactics when perhaps confronting people that for whatever reason they need to shoot. Those are some comments that probably are going to get some scrutiny, but so is what the president had to say at almost the exact same time alongside the nation's governors on a teleconference earlier today.
All right. Well, Ed O'Keefe, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.